And maybe walk over coming, and then you'll have smell of that big plant. I have a great with my husband James over here. And I have a whole housekeeping thing, there's a restroom right here, and then you go down there, and you know what, there's another restroom. We don't do an announcement about upcoming law, because we're working on it, and the person has not, but we're working on it. At this point, I'm going to have, well, maybe we'll have a little bit first, certain things, but can you please go and
I apologize for the many opportunities and blessings we have. This abundant and like that message here. It has to be with us. This is especially today, we all feel like more about being in balance. We get those and that's the blessing of this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
For all for coming, you know, if you look at the Eventbrite sign up, you think we just go see for a coming. I'm going to introduce Jenny, and Jenny can introduce Joe.
Oh,
Right?
I think we'll have Joe speak first, but
No, but okay. But you're Jenny, Champoux, lives in Park.
I met her about 12 years ago when they moved into our Centennial Ward, and found out pretty quickly that she's an art scholar, art historian, I'm sorry. And so at the time I was the enrichment leader in our ward, and I asked her if she would do a thing on art history, which she did, and it was fantastic. It was, you know, like a 2-screen PowerPoint thing. It was so professional. And then over the next year or two, she did 2 more. So one was comparing and contrasting the 2 paintings in our Relief Society room that were of Martha and Mary. Am I getting this right? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
So one was by Minerva Teichert, and the other one was by, I can't remember who.
Walter Reed.
Walter Reed, who went to my house. Anyway, and that was fantastic. And then we had her do one at Christmas time, and it was all about nativity art. So anyway, Jenny's just been a friend for many years, and she is the director of the Book of Mormon art catalog. She's the visionary of it and the creator of it. If you haven't been to this website, you got to go to this website. It's a fantastic resource of Book of Mormon art from 19th century on, right? Anything that is out there, and it's an ongoing catalog. So if you have somebody that's painted like a tree of life or something, or if you've done anything that would fit in to the Mormon, send it to Jenny. She'll put it on the art catalog. It's fantastic. So she also she holds an MA in art history from Boston University and a BA in international politics from Brigham Young University. She's the past vice president of Mormon Scholars in the Humanities, and she's on our Colorado Faith Forum's board, she and Mark, her husband. And she's written for several articles, several papers for BYU Studies. There's an article in the newest Dialogue Journal. What am I forgetting? She's currently working on an article on CCA Christensen. And no, book.
Important distinction.
Yeah, it's all over the place here, yeah. Although she did do an article in BYU Studies on CCA Christensen, and he did all, you know, the Mormon panoramas, fantastic stuff. Anyway, with the Book of Mormon art catalog, she also hosts episodes every Monday where she's interviewing different scholars about art. Anything else you want to say about that one?
Thank you, that's great, thank you.
The other thing is that, okay, so, this is the book they're gonna be talking about tonight. And so, all the beautiful art in here is Jenny's contribution. And a lot of the art is older art, but 9 pieces are brand new, and she commissioned 9 LDS artists to do 9 new pieces for the book, which are now hanging in an exhibit at BYU in the Harold Lehi Library. So that's a lot. That's a lot for my friend Jenny. Oh, besides that, she fly fishes, she skis, and she recently was wiped out by a big wave in Kauai on a boogie board in January that smashed her face, and she had to get stitches, and she looks great. So she survived. And then it was so nice that we got to meet Joe tonight at dinner. I'm grateful to have you here. Joe came and spoke in December at Jenny's home, but we were out of town, so we didn't get to meet you. And this was the book he talked about back then. So this is all about Isaiah in the Book of Mormon. Anyway, I'm just thrilled to have these 2 brilliant scholars here tonight, and grateful to have all of you here too. And I was gonna say one more thing, but it skipped my mind, so never mind. Turn my head.
Gail, thank you so much. That was such a nice introduction. Gail really has been a wonderful friend to me for a long time, and Kathy here also, who we worked together on the faith forums. The 2 of them have been some of my biggest cheerleaders as I've dipped my toe into the Mormon studies world these past 10 years, and I appreciate all your support. Thank you.
I remember what I was gonna.
Yeah.
About Joe. So, and there's an article that he wrote in the newest BYU magazine. Okay.
There is a good piece he wrote about how to read slowly in the Book of Mormon, which I highly recommend. So I have the pleasure of introducing my friend Joseph Spencer. He is first and foremost a philosopher and also happens to be an associate professor at BYU in ancient scripture. He published 7 books, right? 7. His most recent one, A Word in Season, how the Book of Mormon reads Isaiah. Is that Isaiah's reception? Oh, sorry. Yes. That one just came out in the fall, I think, and is fantastic. Really remarkable culmination of years of work that he's done on Isaiah and the Book of Mormon. Will change the way you read the Book of Mormon, and especially the Isaiah passages there. He's the author of dozens of essays on philosophy, theology, and scripture. He just finished 6 years as the editor of the Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, which is a fantastic resource. And he also works with the Latter-day Saint Theology Seminar as co-director. Is that right? Yeah. If you don't know what that group is, they do a really fun project every summer. They gather a little cohort of scholars and they pick one chapter, usually one chapter.
20 verses.
Okay, 20 verses, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they just dissect it. And then at the end, they each present a paper that becomes a little book of these papers that they published. You can buy them on Amazon. Some of them, I think, are on BYU Scholars Archive.
Yes,
Maybe, yes. Really fantastic, insightful readings of the Book of Mormon, interesting theology. He's currently the director of, the president of the Book of Mormon Studies Association. Any other professional qualifications I'm missing?
That's awesome.
Yeah. Apart from all that, Joe's just a wonderful person. He and his wife Karen are just lovely people. And when I first started working on that paper that Gail mentions, looking at the painting of Mary and Martha that was in our Relief Society room in the Easter building, Which is really how I got started on this journey, was sitting in that really study room, looking at that Minerva Teichert painting and comparing it with the Walter Rain of the 10 Virgins, and it just kind of all snowballed from there. But when I first presented that paper at a conference, Joe was there and gave me some really great feedback that helped me be able to revise that paper and publish it. So he's just been a fantastic mentor to me and many other students in the Mormon studies world. So I'm so grateful to him for flying out here to speak with us tonight. And we're going to talk about our book that we co-edited with our colleague Benjamin Keogh. Benjamin is in Scotland, and I think it's about 2 a.m. over there right now, so I don't think he's on Zoom or he wasn't able to join us here. But we're grateful to him for the work he did in dreaming up this idea for this book project and inviting us to be a part of it. We're going to have Joe kick it off first. He'll talk a little bit about his contributions and the scholarly essays, and then I'll talk about the art in the book.
Thank you, Cecilia and Gail. It's a thrill to be here. And back, I mean, I was just here in December, so much warmer this time. What's the greatest challenge to someone who professionally teaches the Book of Mormon at BYU, semester in, semester out? It's simple. Although my students generally settle into their seats on the first day of class with earnest faces and an obedient demeanor, the fact is that most of them are preparing themselves for what they think is inevitable, the same old thing. Heaven help them, so many of them could endure repetitiveness and boredom in religious contexts with astonishing patience. But the fact is that they just aren't planning on getting much of anything new out of the Book of Mormon. They tend to feel they know the characters, the stories, the sermons, the doctrine. It's all old hat, and they're quietly pining for something new. My challenge then is always the same: to see how quickly I can help my students to grasp that they've barely so much as opened the Book of Mormon. What better place to start than Lehi's dream of the tree? Is there anything in the Book of Mormon that regular readers and dutiful churchgoers are more familiar with? The pathway through the dream is one the saints talk about traveling so often that its rods and rivers and mists and mansions have long since become just part of the terrain. If they know anything about the Book of Mormon, they know this. And so, once we've gone through the syllabus and answered questions about grades and expectations, I take them to Lehi's dream. And after just 45 minutes, they are all quite sure that they know nothing about the Book of Mormon. They're ready to begin. The question I'm most often asked in podcasts and in other popular contexts is this: how do I learn to read the Book of Mormon better, more slowly, with greater capacity for learning? For my money, that's what Approaching the Tree, this book that we've put together, is all about. What happens when we take the most familiar story in the whole of the Book of Mormon and then sit with it long enough that it starts to look quite unfamiliar? What happens when scholars do that? What happens when artists do that? Lehi's Dream of the Tree is so many people's entryway into the spiritual world of the Book of Mormon. Why not let it be an entryway also into reading the book with renewed and refreshed eyes? And my contribution to the project, apart from whatever editorial labors we shared out among us in shepherding the book's completion, my contribution was to survey what scholars have had to say in the past about the Dream of the Tree. Where have the saints' many travels with this dream taken us, at least in as much as those travels have been reported in print? I had to leave to others, 7 others, in fact. You should read the book. I had to leave to others to decide what more might be said after all that's already been said. I spent my time in the library, letting others walk me through what they've found in the dream. And I learned a great deal. Now, let me be clear, I don't know that I learned about the dream of the tree itself, so much as I learned about how differently people have worked to make sense of the Book of Mormon. And because the Dream of the Tree is so familiar, there may be more written about it than about almost any other part of the Book of Mormon. To read through what's been said about the dream is therefore to come to see how the study of the Book of Mormon has changed over the decades. Occasionally, of course, I encountered some interpretation or other that was really convincing, that I'll want to have in mind whenever I read Lehi's dream again. But much more often, I felt like I was coming to get a feel for the arc the Book of Mormon is traced through Latter-day Saints intellectual history. And that's something of real value in and of itself. At the very least, to know that history is to know just how open the interpretation of a text, like 1 Nephi 8 really is or can be. Earnest and honest readers with a host of different aims and hopes have worked to make sense of the dream. And they collectively show that we're always free to ask new questions and to expect new answers about the meaning of the dream. The dream isn't one thing, it's many. It certainly has been many things, and it's just as certain to be many more. The essays and artworks you can find in this volume outline some of the new things the dream is turning out to be for the saints right here and right now. So let me share with you all just a brief sketch of what I found in the history of how scholars have read and understood Lehi's dream. And I'll warn you in advance, this is going to be a triumphalist history. You'll see why. The history of the dream's interpretation divides naturally into three broad and somewhat overlapping periods. During the first period, stretching from the mid-1940s to the mid-1980s, scholars writing about Lehi's dream and about the Book of Mormon in general predominantly wrote about it from a specifically historical point of view. Each of the three great founders of academic study of the Book of Mormon, Sidney Sperry, Wells Jakeman, Hugh Nibley, had something to say about the dream, and each took his own historical angle on the text. Sperry worked to fit the dream into a historically reconstructible genre. Jakeman labored to connect the dream to known archaeological finds from ancient Mesoamerica. Think of that Tree of Life stone. And Nibley compared the dream's imagery to things found in pre-modern Arabian desert life. Later heirs to these founding figures developed and sharpened, and in some cases corrected, think of that Tree of Life stone, corrected these early historicizations of the dream, but really new approaches to the dream didn't surface until a second period of study arose. The second period stretched from the mid-1970s into the 2010s. As representative of a new, aspiringly dominant force. And it featured scholars who came at the dream from a primarily literary perspective. In the late 1970s, a flurry of literary treatments appeared, most impressively Bruce Jorgensen's typological interpretation of the dream. But the culture wars of the early 1980s, which continued into the 1990s, put literary readers somewhat on the defensive. Further literary treatments during those decades, such as those by Richard Rust and Mark Thomas, tended to divide along the lines of the resulting culture wars, enlisting literary insight in the service either of the Book of Mormon's ancient origins or the Book of Mormon's modern origins. What filled the void a bit, though, during those years was, one, a doctrinal approach to the dream, that is a style of reading it that put it in the service of confirming the official teachings of the church. And two, a few further historical studies in the vein of earlier decades, follow-ups on Nibley especially. By the early 2000s, though, literary study of the Book of Mormon was back on the agenda, and a remarkable collection of literary studies of the dream have appeared since, essays especially by Amy Easton Flake, Grant Hardy, and Charles Swift. During the same first decade of the new millennium, there began a third period that continues quite strongly into the present, represented best in all kinds of ways by this very book that we're launching the last couple of months here. The currently dominant approach in scholarly writing on the dream is specifically theological. This began with forays by Terrell Gibbons and, awkwardly, myself, borrowing literary tools for the work of interpretation, but then putting the results into the service of understanding the divine quite specifically. But really, Terrell's work, my work in this regard, were just trumpets heralding a whole lot more theology that's still to come, beginning with the remarkable treatments you can find in Approaching the Tree. The theological era of Book of Mormon study has just begun, and it's already a tree that's bearing interesting fruit. I highly recommend you sample some of what's being done. We don't get a lot by way of royalties, so that's not a one for one. As I said, this outline of the history of how scholars have made sense of Lehi's dream is also an outline of the history of how scholars have made sense of the Book of Mormon in general. Historical approaches to the Book of Mormon dominated for half a century before literary and also doctrinal approaches to the book began to appear, however hesitantly at first. And in recent years, we've watched as literary work on the Book of Mormon has begun to be bent in the direction of theological reflection. It's as if historians and literary critics and doctrinal scholars as well have collectively helped us to see just where to find the end of the iron rod that is the Book of Mormon, that is the Word of God, which will lead us through the dark to an encounter with Christ. In my clearly biased view, theologians are holding firmly to the rod that previous generations of scholarship have helped them to identify, are following that rod toward the end of the path it runs along, and are calling back through the darkness to say something about the beauty of the tree they're seeing as they draw closer to him. It's worth listening to what the theologians are saying, I think. They aren't prophets, let's be clear. None of them is Lehi, standing squarely at the foot of the tree and calling others to enjoy its fruits with divine authority. But I do think they're shining some light amid a great many mists of darkness. And so long as they keep their eyes squarely on the tree that lies ahead of them, we stand to do some real good. Now, Jenny's, of course, introducing you to the new art that appears in Approaching the Tree tonight, as well as to the fascinating history of artistic portrayals of the dream that has led up to the work produced for this book. Let me then take just a few minutes to introduce you to the new theological work you can find in the book, in Approaching the Tree. There are 7 essays in the volume that offer strikingly fresh theological readings of the dream of the tree. 2 kinds of scholarly backgrounds are dominant in the training of the 7 authors of these essays. They are, all of them, trained in one or both of 2 fields, literary criticism and theology. Given what I've already said about the shape of Book of Mormon theology, that shouldn't be a surprise. What might be more surprising is that the group is international. In addition to 4 Americans, there are 3 Brits, 2 of them from England, 1 from Scotland, our fearless leader. Further, we were most pleased to welcome to the project one theological reader who isn't a Latter-day Saint, who is in fact an Anglican minister. At any rate, it teaches at Oxford. At any rate, you'll find in the volume essays by the following 7 scholars: Benjamin Keogh, Rosalind Welch, the Reverend Andrew Teal, Kimberly Matheson, Kylie Turley, Timothy Ferrant, and Terrell Gibbons. As you no doubt anticipate, each author takes a unique angle on the possible theological meaning of the dream. I could burn up hours summarizing and responding to these essays. They're excellent. Let me instead just give you a sketch of what each author contributes. Benjamin Keogh's essay begins from the idea that God always represents right relationships, and that God is therefore always working to repair wrong relationships among human beings. He brings this idea to the reading of the dream, underscoring ways that Lehi's family is fraught with wrong relationships. The dream brings these issues to the surface of Lehi's mind, and that allows him to refocus his efforts on drawing his family together in love. Remember that the dream account ends with Lehi speaking to his sons with all the feeling of a tender parent. Rosalind Welch asks the interesting question of how Joseph Smith and his earliest contemporaries would have understood the imagery of Lehi's dream. While we've been well trained to think about Arabian desert imagery when we read the dream, the earliest readers knew the American frontier, and so had a rather different notion of things like wildernesses, fields, trees, paths, and iron rods. The dream looks beautifully unfamiliar to us when we imagine how it might have been familiar to other readers, and how it might make itself familiar to readers quite different from us today. There's theological significance in this malleability and accessibility of the dream. Reverend Teal brings his deep learning in the Christian theological tradition to the dream, placing it into its scriptural context and then asking about the significance of several images. He reflects especially on the contrast between the agricultural setting that opens the dream and the urban setting that concludes it, asking how the juxtaposition might urge us to read the dream with pre-modern readers like the early Christian fathers, rather than our own postmodern context. He then gives us a fresh reading of the dream with very new conversation partners. Kim Matheson explores an experimental reading of the dream that yields surprising results. She notes that it's only Nephi, not Lehi, who calls the dream's tree the tree of life. Nephi never calls it that. And then she explores a few hints from the dream itself that might suggest that Lehi understood the tree to be not the tree of life, but rather the tree of knowledge of good and evil, just as familiar though from the Garden of Eden. This approach allows her to explore the deep anxiety that underlies the dream report, centered on Lehi's lack of knowledge regarding members of his family. We go with Lehi into the dark and dreary wilderness after his eye-opening eating of the fruit. Kylie Turley comes to the dream with her indelible aptitude for mining details. She explores, you get appendices when you get Kylie Turley. She explores a host of literary aspects of the text, asking at every point along the way what they might mean for the larger theological meaning of the dream. Yeah. Especially in focus for her is the fact that the verse that seems to introduce the dream report concerns itself, apparently mundanely, with the fact that the family carried seeds with them into the wilderness. But what if these literal seeds serve as a figure for the worry that Lehi has regarding his own seed and the seeds of his children? The dream is a literary masterpiece, and we've only begun to explore its complexity. Tim Ferrant opens his essay by drawing readers toward a famous story in St. Augustine's Confessions about an adolescent peccadillo stealing some pears and then throwing them away for no good reason. For Augustine, the youthful episode serves as an illustration of his own depravity. It's the guy that came up with the original sin. It's an illustration of his own depravity, the kind of thing that sent him on a spiritual quest that eventually made a Christian of him. What happens if one reads Lehi's dream alongside this classic of Christian spirituality? Got to steal some fruit in the dream too. And much, it turns out, it comes out of such a reading. It not only allows for a rich reading of the dream, but also for serious reflection on how to read scripture theologically rather than strictly historically, as Augustine taught Christians. Terrell Gibbons finally offers a reflection on a moment in the dream that readers don't give nearly as much thought to as they ought. Lehi's time lost in the darkness before his prayers bring deliverance and access to the tree. Taking this as a kind of figure for every great Christian's anxiety about salvation, he points out how Lehi's escape from the darkness brings him to focus on his family, and so rewrites the questions of Christian anxiety as a question about how to save families and eventually whole peoples. From the beginning of the Book of Mormon, this scripture points away from individualism and toward covenant community. Now, I've been brief, but also I don't want to spoil anything. I've got my book. So I hope I've given you a sense of what fruit is growing on the tree of the dream that is so far gone untasted. And one can probably safely assume that these first serious theological readers are reaching for some of the most visible fruit. What will happen when we as readers learn to climb further up into the branches of the tree, reach further behind what's on the surface, or even just wait to see what hasn't ripened yet, and so can't even be plucked rightly at this moment? There are feasts yet to come, but I hope in this book we're offering a feast of fat things worth eating. I have high hopes myself and higher hopes for what's to come. Thank you.
Well, you can see why it was so fun for me to work on this project with people like Benjamin and Joe. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the art in the book, and I think this is what really makes this book unique, apart from the really fantastic essays that Joe just summarized. It's really unique to have this dialogue between the scholarly essays and the art, and to see how together they're creating a really rich theology, and that the art is part of that work. So when we first started thinking about Lehi's dream art, we've all seen images of Lehi's dream. It's probably one of the more common images we see in our manuals. And I started gathering some, what I could think of Lehi's dream art and doing some searches. And we just kept finding more and more. And we actually, with the Book of Mormon art catalog now, we know that it is by far the most frequently depicted scene in all of Book of Mormon art. What's interesting about it, though, is that it's not a historical moment, like so many other moments in the Book of Mormon. It's not Helaman leading the stripling warriors to battle. It's a vision that, or a dream, or he calls it a vision too, that Lehi had. And then, so pictures or images in his mind, that he then explained with words to his family. Nephi wrote that down. And then Joseph Smith translated it years later. So it goes through these several layers of interpretation and transformation. And I think that makes depicting Lehi's dream art really challenging, because it's not a specific historical moment, but it also opens up a lot of possibilities for the art because of its sort of open-endedness. One thing we noticed though is that the art tended to follow the same patterns. So a lot of Lehi's dream art approaches the dream in very similar ways. And, in my essay in the book, I kind of talk about the 4 main approaches to compositionally to depicting the dream. And we noticed that there were some other parts of the dream that could be depicted and maybe were worth dwelling on, but just weren't really showing up in the art. And a few of them that I list in the book here are considering the order of events as Lehi relates them, right? So we tend to see pictures of the dream where everything's condensed into one sort of map-like terrain, whereas Lehi experienced it as a series of things unfolding to him over the course of the dream. There's very little art that depicts it that way. Again, just the idea of it being a visionary scripture. There's a professor at BYU, Charles Swift, who's written about this sort of visionary scripture. And I think there's a lot more ways that the artists are visually could tap into the possibilities there. Joe mentioned the familial focus of Lehi's retelling of the dream. And that's not been something that we've seen a lot of in the art, that an emphasis on sort of Lehi and his sons. And along with that, Sariah, right, is one of only 3 named women in the Book of Mormon, Book of Mormon women. And so she shows up a fair amount, but often as just kind of a peripheral character. Again, there's only a few images that really center on Sariah. And I think there's possibility there for thinking more about her role. We also talked in Terrell Gibbons' essay, he talked about this, the dark and dreary ways that Lehi wanders through. And again, only 3 or 4 artworks that emphasize or really tap into that moment at all. And then including Christ in the scene. We know from Nephi's explanation of the dream that Christ is really the center of it, and yet he shows up in very little of the art. I'm going to run you through just a very quick history of some of Lehi's dream art, and these are all in the book too. And I won't show you all the ones in the book. It's just so again, you gotta buy the book. We're lucky that they were able to print the full color images. They look really beautiful. So take a look. The earliest depiction of Lehi's dream that we have comes from David Hiram Smith. It's up here. Does anyone know who David Hiram Smith was? Yeah, tell us who.
He was a son of Joseph.
Right.
But he was president of the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Exactly, right. So yeah, so we don't often see this in our tradition. This is housed at the Community of Christ archives in Missouri. But the first attempt at visualizing it, and really one of the first attempts at visualizing any Book of Mormon content. So it looks a little different than the art we see today in our manuals, but as one of the earliest people to visualize the Book of Mormon, he was drawing on art that he'd seen in Europe and America. And you can see some of that kind of neoclassical styling in the figures and the poses and their drapery. Yeah, it's interesting the angel doesn't have wings. That already is coming into LDS artistic theology here, even in, I think it was 1874. In the 1980s and 90s, there was a real explosion of Book of Mormon art, and especially with Lehi's dream art. A lot of this was thanks to Richard Oman, who was the curator at the Museum of Church History and Art. Now it's called the Church History Museum. And he really worked to broaden the scope of LDS art, especially internationally. He helped create the international art competition that they still do every 3 years there. But even though there is a lot more art happening in the 80s and 90s, a lot of it looks very similar to each other. This is an example by Stephen Neal. This is a massive canvas that he did. I'm sure you've seen this. I think it's in the current manual. It's been in a lot of the Book of Mormon manuals. And again, it does a nice job of capturing all of the symbols. So we have a tree and a river and a mist of darkness and the spacious building and the field and the rod. And we even have Lehi up here in the corner sleeping as this dream appears above him. In my essay, I call this the panoramic approach, which tends to be the most popular approach to depicting it. It's very narrative and didactic, right? I'm just trying to show you all the elements of the dream. In the 90s and early 2000s, we started seeing more symbolic approaches where sometimes artists would just focus on one element from the dream, like the iron rod or the tree of life. And then also sometimes universalizing it. So instead of showing Lehi in the dream, it was just sort of an everyman or an every woman here, so that you might, as a viewer, picture yourself in the dream. And I just wanted to show you a few of the international pieces that were these are all in the Church History Museum. So this is from Peru. Emily, Emily's been to Peru a bunch. Have you ever seen a retablo like this? It's kind of supposed to be a traditional Peruvian artistic form, where it's a little cabinet that opens up, the panels open, and inside are these little boxes, and each one is a different scene. So this is really fun because it's one of the only pieces that does this, that shows Lehi progressing through the different moments of the dream as it's described in 1 Nephi 8. One from Sierra Leone, the Dene Navajo sandstone piece here, and one from Taiwan. So really, I think that the idea of a sacred tree or a tree of life is so universal in a lot of cultures and throughout history. And so I think it's something that a lot of international artists have felt very comfortable with combining their own cultural and artistic traditions with this Book of Mormon moment. I'm so sorry. Okay, so we have 9 new artworks in the book. Oh yeah. But maybe it's the dust, Kathy, but I want to say to Kathy, Kathy and James are in the middle of renovating their house, and they are so nice to let us be here tonight. And we know you went to a lot of trouble to rearrange things for us, so thank you. Okay. Okay, so our 9 new artworks, we wanted to have this sort of conversation between the scholarship and the art. So we sent the artists, well, first we put together a list of artists we wanted to invite, and everyone was excited to participate and came on board. And then we sent them little summaries of the scholarly essays just to get them thinking, maybe considering new approaches that there might be a different way to visualize it. First one, I'm just going to run through them real quick. The first one, and this is on the cover by J. Kirk Richards. It's called Pulling Up the Iron Rod. And we felt like this really encapsulated the project that we were doing, the idea that we each need to wrestle with the Word of God, that it's a continuing process, and that it's something that we do individually, but also as a group, and you can see them working together, but they're really having to heft that rod. I'm sorry. I feel like everyone's sick right now too, and now I'm afraid I'm getting something. Okay. Next we have Rose Day Tuck doll, and we love how she focused on this familial aspect, and with these kind of monotone blues and silvers, it adds to the mood of kind of grief and coldness and sadness as Lehi is standing there with the fruit, calling to his sons, and we just see their feet as they're walking away from him. Just a really heartbreaking image. Megan Novak-Geilman, she does these really fun photo compositions, and she usually will start with a famous artwork. So here she started with a Salvador Dali piece, and she's rearranged things. I mean, the composition is very similar, but she's replaced the items with things that go more with the Book of Mormon context. So she has a little bonsai tree for the tree of life, and a little brown seer stone, and a clear stone referencing the brother of Jared, and some white figs, and a moss. So these symbols that come from our scriptures. I like that this is kind of tapping into that visionary surrealist aspect of the dream. Sarah Winiger did this beautiful woodblock print. This is called Rod of Hands and Feet, and I think it's really remarkable because she has reimagined this not as a rod of iron, but a rod of people. And instead of being straight and linear, it's an infinite circle. And these people are working together and serving each other. And they're women and children with Christ at the top there, setting the example. And Sarah said that her idea was that it's through these relationships that we come to God. Hildebrando de Mello is an artist from Angola. He usually does really abstract, non-figurative work. You can see here, it is pretty abstract, but he's still, you have an idea of the tree here. It's 3 separate panels, and they're actually quite large, and they really are stunning to see in person. The paint is sort of 3-dimensional as it comes off the canvas. He uses all kinds of implements and tools to create these textures in his art. I like that this, with the set of 3 of them, you kind of move, your eye kind of moves between them, looking at the similarities and differences, and you get this sense of balance and of movement and change, and all of that is really thematic in Lehi's dream too. Caitlin Connolly, again, focused on this familial aspect with Lehi and Soraya in the center here, grieving for the loss of those that will not, of their posterity that will not take of the fruit. And Jose de Faria is from Portugal, and I love the colors here. I love this sort of, again, kind of a little bit surrealist feeling, the way he's playing with perspective and proportion, throwing things off balance a little bit, like they might be in a dream. Trees that look kind of like trees, but with strange colors and patterns. Everything just a little bit strange. But I love the way he's depicted the tree of life as this white, there's water in there. I'm gonna go to so it's sort of this oval shape in medieval Christian art. Christ is often portrayed in a mandorla, which looks like this kind of oval shape to distinguish Christ. And I like that he's used that shape here for the tree. I think it brings in a little bit of that reference to Christ. Annie Poon, so fun. She's in New York. She's a fantastic artist. This is actually a photograph. She created this little clay model of Lehi. like a little puppet, and she put these big button eyes on him, made him look kind of scrawny. So he's in the dark and dreary waste here, and she really wanted to capture this idea of him having this very visceral experience of this, like the horror of the absence of God and the absence of light. And you can see these little ghost figures kind of floating around him. And he's even got his hands raised. Maybe, you know, this is sometimes an art, a gesture prayer. Maybe this is the moment where he's calling to God for mercy. But just, I think I think that this image, honestly, it surprised me. But I like that I feel like what do I want to say? It gives me a very visceral response to it, like a very embodied response to thinking about what it means to be in the world and to be separated from God. And then finally, Kathleen Peterson, again, focusing on the father and two sons, really lovely patterning and this focus on the psychology as the men look to each other, and we as the viewer our eye kind of moves across the faces and the hands as we see this dynamic between them. So I mean, I love the way that each of these artists really sat with the scriptures and with the essays and tried to think about new or alternative ways of visualizing it, or ways to emphasize things. I think art, one thing that art does is helps provide new perspectives. And I feel like each of these pieces has done that really well. At its heart, Lehi's dream is about God's love for us and the love that we should have for each other. And I like that each of these pieces help me reflect on that message. While we're here, while I have a captive audience, I'm going to talk to you for a second about the Book of Mormon art catalog, and then we'll do Q&A on the book. Gail mentioned this at the beginning, but here's a QR code if you didn't pick up a flyer. Book of Mormon art catalog.org. And this has been the project I've been working full time on the past 2 or 3 years. And it grew out of this book project. It was as I was trying to get a sense of the trends in Lehi's dream art that I realized it's really hard as a scholar to evaluate LDS art when there wasn't a way to really have a comprehensive view of what had been done in the art. So I just did it. I just made it. And I'm grateful to the Maxwell Institute at BYU for funding this project. So we've gathered so far over 4,000 images from more than 700 artists, starting with the very earliest piece in 1870 up until I'm adding new stuff every week as things, especially this year, it seems like there are a lot of people working on the Book of Mormon, which is great. We have 55 different countries that the artists come from. This piece here is from an artist, he was from Haiti. Oh, sorry. So in the catalog, you'll see the stuff, the familiar stuff, Arnold Freeberg's, right? Del Carson's stuff we all grew up with. But you'll also see some of the older things that we don't see as often anymore. These are 2 of the earliest pieces. One of Nephi being protected by a daughter of Ishmael and her mom, and then a vision of Nephi seeing Mary and the Christ child up in the clouds. And I love recovering this history of how the early saints were thinking about their scriptures and bringing their own cultural traditions as they immigrated to Utah and combining it with this love of the Book of Mormon. I love that this really early piece centers on a woman, right? And it's not a moment that we talk about a lot or see a lot of imagery of today. And then we also are just finding lots of fun stuff that artists are doing currently. This print here is by Annie Kuhn, who did that Lehi in the Dark and Dreary Waste. This is from Alma, bear with patience my afflictions. So beautiful, this angel supporting him as God reaches out to him. And then Stephanie K. Northrup is actually, she lives in Colorado, and she's doing some really fun different depictions in the Book of Mormon. This is Abish running to tell people to come see the king. I also love how the Book of Mormon art catalog allows us to compare images. So I think there's so much to be gained from not just seeing one image of a scene or a person, but seeing a lot of art and seeing a lot of different perspectives. So these are all Captain Moroni, but each of them different, and each of them help me think about his story differently. And they come from all over the world. Oh, I already showed you some of these. Just even stylistically, it's fun to compare. These are both dealing with Alma 36 when and Alma, the son of Alma, his conversion process. But you know, one done in a more traditional figurative style and one more of a minimalist abstract. And each functions beautifully, but they're very different and they speak to me differently. And I like seeing them together. Oh, okay. And then I did want to mention the Behold series that Gail mentioned. You'll see Joe. Joe did one with me. Maybe that, I think that is coming out this next week. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So you can look for that on Monday. Yeah, so every week we picked one Book of Mormon artwork that I think will be less familiar to most people, and it goes with the Come Follow Me reading for that week, the scripture reading. And then I sat down with a different scholar every week and we talked about the scriptures and that artwork, and they're just about 10 minutes long, each one of them. So they're fun and short and a nice way to just get a different little perspective on.
And they're on YouTube, they're on.
Yeah. They're on YouTube at Book of Mormon Art Catalog channel, or they're on our website in the blog section of our website. We're on, I post them on Instagram and Facebook. Yeah, thanks for asking. Yeah. I did want to mention, I have 3 copies of the book. If anyone wanted to buy one, you don't have to. I just happen to have 3 extra copies. If you'd like one, let me know. And I know we do have some friends joining us on Zoom. So for Q&A, Mark, can they send a chat?
Put it in the chat and I'll ask it.
Okay, if you're on Zoom and you have a question, put it in the chat. You can put it, if you want to chat directly with the Colorado Faith Forum's profile.
Don't chat with the caller, chat with me.
Oh, okay, no, so Mark.
Yeah, chat with the Mark Champoux profile.
Okay, chat with Mark Champoux. Or just put it in the chat to everyone and Mark will read your questions to us. Gail, what should I just, do we just want to start out? I mean, Joe, come out here. Yeah.
Going back to 3 arts, how big is that when we said that one of the really big panels? It's just a stand up on the
And Jen, repeat the question so people are like.
Okay, so she's wondering on the Hildebrando de Mello, the 3-panel piece, how big is it? I think they're about 3 by 3. Yeah. 3 feet by 3 feet each. Yeah.
then I in that and so is that like if you're in front of the ground, or is that so it's a 3-dimensional?
Go back to Amy. Okay.
Is that like the big figure in front of that ground that she put, so it's like sculpture?
Yeah, so she actually made a 3-dimensional little clay puppet and sewed little clothes for him and put these button eyes on, and then just photographed him and had him she sent me a picture of her whole setup. I should have brought it, but she had these little ghosts dangling on wires. They were moving, and then she was kind of shaking the table too. So Lehi is kind of blurred as she was taking the photograph. Yeah, in the dark.
The finished product for her is this.
Yeah, that is, yeah.
Not how she.
Right, yeah, this is, yeah, the photo is the finished artwork, yeah. Mhm.
And I crossed the one that was like Salvador.
Yeah,
Was that, so I saw the pics, but then would that.
Yeah.
Bring that picture.
oh, the big egg, the ostrich egg, Yeah.
Tell me about.
yeah. So, you know, I love the work that Megan does. I think it's really fantastic. She actually has a new show opening with some new work next month, in April. The ostrich egg, she told me she really didn't know why. She just felt like it was important. Mhm. That was the one element that she couldn't tell me why. It just felt right. So there's this big ostrich egg here, and then there's just a regular egg. Now, in the Salvador Dali painting, there are these egg shapes all over the landscape. And so she's replaced them all with different, so, and then you have the brown cedar stone, clear stone, a moth on some, moss. And these are the two white ceramic figs. And then the lion, is it Asherah? I always say it wrong. Asherah. Thank you. Which is sometimes depicted as a lion, and this idea of the divine mother, which sometimes is iconographically linked to a tree of life, or so she's incorporated that. And the Salvador Dali piece had a lion in it too, so it works both ways.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
A question from online, I don't know if it's Patrick or Meredith, but McKinnon's asked, is there a good way to find out if prints are available of some of the Book of Mormon artwork?
From the book or in general?
In general, so maybe you can speak to what the information that's available on the art catalog.
Okay. So I know on the new artworks, most of them have sold. A few of the photographs are still available, and I think Rose Daytop's dolls painting is still available. In terms of other pieces.
Or prints of the prints.
Prints, oh,
Of the catalog, not just this.
from anything. So, okay, so the Book of Mormon art catalog does not sell anything, where I'm just there just compiling all the information. So if there's an artwork in there that you like, I've included any information I could find about it, including the artist's website or any commercial sites that sell prints of it. So you can just go right to those links and find it there if I have it, if I was able to find it there. Does that help answer the question?
The divine feminine, that you kind of talked about with the Asherah reference. I haven't read the book yet. Is it captured in there? Because that seems to be something that's pretty essential, at least in Nephi's interpretive experience with the angel. And I'm curious about that.
Yeah, none of the new essays, the 7 essays I described, that I recall, deals with Asherah connections. My essay in it that summarizes the history of how people interpret the dream does. There's a famous essay by Daniel Peterson, where he finds Asherah, where he draws out this connection. And then that's actually inspired an astonishing amount of recent literature and not just scholarly, also poetry and so on. So I summarized that briefly and point people to the places to find it, but none of the new essays deal with the potential Asherah connection.
And one follow-up, was there any particular criteria that you used in the art that you selected? You had mentioned this, but I didn't catch it.
Well, yeah, no, we developed a list of artists that we thought would do something interesting. And we wanted it to be a diverse group of artists from around the world, different countries, male, female, different backgrounds. They're all LDS. But we really weren't too heavy-handed about telling them what to do or how to do it. We just provided some, we provided the essays for them to look at, but then it was really up to them to engage with it and come up with their own idea. I love the way they're all so different.
No, the artwork was in reference to the project itself. It wasn't.
Yeah, we weren't strict or mean about that, right? As we envisioned it, we hoped it would be this kind of almost conversation,
Yeah.
right? And some of the artwork was very much that. Others were sort of like, I'm gonna do my thing, and it worked really well. But that was the design for sure.
It's only been on my mind because we were talking about this, but you had mentioned that, I don't know if it was one of the essays said that it might be the tree of knowledge of good and evil instead of the tree of life.
Yeah,
Was that one of the essays?
it's one of the essays, yeah.
That says that.
Yeah, and to be clear, the theological method that's being used there is not like, I'm gonna figure out what it is and there, boom, I'm making an argument that that's what Lehi. The method is actually to say, what if you look at a couple of things here, it kind of suggests that, we don't know that for sure, but let's play with that as a kind of hypothesis and see what it does theologically. So that's what Kim Matheson's essay in the book does, is explores, if this is the tree of knowledge instead of the tree of life, what would that mean about the tree?
Isn't it general knowledge in the church that it is the tree of life?
Well, what she points out is that it's Nephi later who calls it the tree of life, but
Not,
Lehi never calls it that. So she plays with the possibility that Lehi might himself have understood it.
This is in the summary.
It might be in the chapter heading. Chapter heading was written by a committee in the 1970s. So yeah, and I mean, I think clearly Nephi sees it as the tree of life, but she plays with the possibility that Lehi may have understood it differently, which would be interesting. Yeah.
I think that's a good point though, because even Alma later talks about a tree of life or the seed that grows into this tree of life and the delicious fruit, very much drawing on Lehi's imagery of tasting the delicious fruit as he's talking about the seed that grows into a tree of life. So yeah.
So you'll have to read the essay. and see.
So this is Lehi's dream and not Nephi's dream of Lehi's dream.
Correct. Yeah, the subtitle of the book is interpreting First Nephi 8. So it's very specifically that dream. And I mean, in some of the conversations that the authors of the essays had leading up to the writing, it was very deliberate. This is not about the whole package of Nephi and Lehi. This is just how do we read the one chapter.
Fascinating to do one now on Nephi's.
It would.
Read that later.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have the few part.
Yeah, and you have several females in
Right.
Nephi. Yeah.
just the conversation you might have had with Reverend Teal, I think from, what was that like?
Yeah, so Reverend Teal is deeply interested in Latter-day Saints.
Yeah.
And he became close friends with Elder Holland a handful of years ago, and that developed into a long-term relationship with the church. He's a fascinating character. So he's an Anglican minister, and in his congregation in Oxford, when they have All Saints Day, for instance, and he's running mass, he prays to Joseph Smith and Brigham Young along with the rest of the saints. He's a very interesting character, right? So when we began working on the project, the idea came up of inviting him, see if he would be a part of it, and he jumped right on board. And Latter-day Saint scholars can be a little nervous whether someone outside the tradition will say something naive or something, like they read the thing and then say something like, yeah, we all thought that in primary, or something, you know. But he blew us out of the water, right? He had really interesting things to say. Really.
Did he just do devotional and work every way?
Yeah.
Same line. Jenny, are there any artists who are not part of faith for depicting for Mormons that you're aware of?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Non-LDS artists, is that?
Yeah, Eric's wondering if there are any non-LDS artists working on Book of Mormon or any restoration.
Or have done anything, not currently, but even in the past. Not many people Christ.
Yeah.
What about the Polish guy?
Oh, yeah.
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, there is. Oh, really? You'll have to look it up in the
I
archive.
know that. It's not.
Roman Sledge. I don't know how you, I don't speak Polish.
He's speaking to the microphone.
No. His name is Roman Sledge. And he was friends with Walter Whipple, who was he was a mission president over there in Poland, and he became friends with this artist and gave him a copy of the Book of Mormon, and he read it and he did all these wood carvings. I think it was about 20 of them. Wood carvings, different moments of the Book of Mormon. And it's really neat too, because he didn't have all this baggage of the like visual history that we have. He was coming to it having just read the Book of Mormon and no commentary and no other images. And then how would I put this in a sculpture?
And the result is marvelously Catholic.
Yeah.
It's very
the modern day view of finding God, and searching for God, believing in God. That's a lot different now than it was even 20 years ago. In other words, we have an erosion of people that believe in God. Okay. In this dream, when I just read it recently, I could not detect a single person in the dream that didn't believe in God. So this has to be interpreted. In other words, we're not reading about Lehi's dream, we're reading about Lehi's interpretation of what he saw. So I wonder if you could just comment about a more modern and therefore a more meaningful approach for us to, help us understand what actually was going on in Lehi's dream. For example, the people in the what is it, the high-rise building?
Great space.
The great space building there.
High rise.
In our modern time, these are people that criticize us for believing in God, not for not wanting to be part of the family. And maybe you could comment on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I don't know that any of these essays deals directly with that, which is interesting, but it really deserves attention. It's worth saying that you could say that right within the Book of Mormon, you get at least two voices who do exactly this, though. When Nephi circles back to the imagery of the dream and his concerns about the dream in 2nd Nephi, and I'm thinking here, 2nd Nephi 25 through 30 after the Isaiah chapters, Nephi is now talking about the coming forth of the Book of Mormon in a time when they will say there are no miracles, there's no God today. He's worried about a culture of secularization and the loss of God. And he's clearly still think he's using the imagery of the dream all the way through this. So Nephi does seem to try to bring the dream into that conversation. The other is Alma. I mean, Jenny just mentioned Alma coming back to this imagery in Alma 32, but Alma's responding there. This is right after Korihor, and that's not an accident, right? Korihor is the first overt atheist in the Book of Mormon. Originally, Alma 30 through 35 is one chapter. It's only later that gets divided up into smaller chapters that we know today. That's originally one. Korihor is the introduction to Alma's sermon, where he's drawing on the imagery of the dream and the tree of life to try to give you a way of thinking about how to have faith and knowledge in the face of overt doubt. So I think, yeah, the Book of Mormon itself is actually trying to answer exactly that question, but in later voices. Lehi doesn't think about atheism, but these other voices do, which is, yeah, we needed an 8th essay, maybe. That's a great question.
So you've talked a lot about how the familial stuff is in there. And I wonder if there's anything in there about how Lehi makes it through the tree. And he beckons his family, but never leaves to go.
Yeah.
Back. He stays.
You bet you have
Tree.
maybe 3 of the essays deal with that. Yeah. I went to school. Can I get you? There was, since the book was published by a BYU entity, Maxwell Institute, there was a lot of scrutiny at BYU, right? Of anything that's got BYU stamp on it. And there was a lot of nervousness about some of the essays because of exactly this question.
Yeah.
Because several of the essays are wrestling with, does Lehi do enough? Is Lehi got a broken family? And there was a lot of kind of hand wringing, like, you talk about a prophet that way? But yeah, several of the essays are reflecting on exactly those kinds of questions in really rich ways. Yeah.
I've always had a question in my mind as I read this. He refers to this experience, as both a dream and a vision. And I've always in my mind thought those two are different things, because everybody knew them as synonymous terms. And in fact, later on, Nephi was asking for a clarification of it, then it's referred to as the vision,
Right.
not the dream. So
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we haven't been repeating questions, have we? The question was, Lehi called it a dream or a vision, right? But Nephi later just speaks of a vision. Would they have understood dreams and visions is the same thing? It's a good question to ask a historian rather than a philosopher. But I can tell you exactly who's written about this. One of the essays, of course, I stumbled on as I put together the history of the interpretation of the dream. It's an essay by Dana Pike, and it's just on dream culture in ancient Israel and how it would help us understand what's happening in the dream. So I don't remember what he says about that in particular, but that would be the essay to read. Dana Pike on dream culture in ancient Israel.
I find it fascinating that several people have this dream, Lehi and the son of Nephi, but I recall also learning in my church history that Joseph Smith Sr. also had a vision. A similar to 9 years before the first vision, and 10 years before the translation of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if there's any reference to how Joseph Smith Sr.'s vision may have inspired the interpretation of Joseph Smith. And if there's any artwork that depicts and compares and contrasts the different visions that Joseph Smith and other people.
Well, you speak to the art, I'll say something. The question was, there's this account of Joseph Smith Sr. having a dream very like the dream of the tree. And the question was, how do we think about that relationship, basically, right, between that dream and the dream that Lehi has and Nephi's interpretation of that and his vision, and then is there any artwork that thinks about these various dreams? I'll say just a quick thing about this. There's 3 ways people have made sense of Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream among scholars. There are those who are like, isn't that amazing? Joseph Smith Sr. also had this dream. So there's that version, kind of another wonder. The second version is, oh, Joseph Smith Sr. had this dream. Now we know the source for the Book of Mormon. Right, so it's a skeptical version. And then there's the critical response, which says, hang on. Joseph Smith, supposedly Joseph Smith Sr. supposedly had that dream, according to Lucy Mack Smith, writing in 1853. So how much was her account of her husband's dream shaped by reading the Book of Mormon? So it's actually kind of a complicated affair, right? The only account we have of that dream is so much after she's been reading the Book of Mormon for a couple decades. How well is she remembering it? How much is it shaped by her reading of the Book of Mormon? But also, obviously, it was floating around the family. So how would Joseph have heard it when he's translating the Book of Mormon? Does it shape the words he uses as he translates? Or does he just start dictating this dream and go, whoa, Dad had this, or what, right? So yeah, so there's a lot of ways people try to make sense of that, but it's kind of a muddle for now because it's such a late reminiscence. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of the art, there's one piece from Mexico by a lady, and I cannot remember her name right now, but it does show Joseph Smith, and I think taps into this a little bit. That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head. But you know, also in Reverend Teal's essay, he talks about these similar kinds of stories in Christian tradition. I mean, Tree of Life, right, is so ubiquitous in, I mean, last year I read Pilgrim's Progress with my daughter, and I was blown away by the similarities there. So I don't know. I mean, I think there's something kind of universal about it. It doesn't really concern me too much.
Yeah, it's worth saying it's no accident that this has gotten so much response from artists globally, because the Tree of Life is it's an image in every tradition, right? So this grabs people.
Question for both.
for Joe is if you were asked to write your interpretation of the tree, what direction would you take? And for the art piece,
There we go.
what do you wish there'd be more depictions of for us to facilitate a better understanding?
Question was, what would I write if I wrote an essay on it? And then Jenny gets to tell an artist what to do. I mean, I've written about the dream of the tree of life before we did this project. And so, in fact, when Ben Keogh approached me about doing the project, he kind of said, so you've had your say, so let's get some other people to say some things, which was kind of fun. So what I've argued in print, and I think there are things I'd like to do and go further, but I want to spend some serious time deciding what that looks like. But what I've argued in print is that we have to understand the dream as split in two. There are two halves. And in the first half, it's a familial dream. And the second half is when now there are numberless concourses of angels. But the dividing line is the moment Laman and Lemuel don't eat. And what I take that to mean is that they don't eat, and suddenly there's a rod, a path, numberless concourses of people. I take it the numberless concourse of people are the descendants of Laman and Lemuel. So as soon as they don't eat, now Lehi sees all of his distant seed wandering and not sure how to get there. And I think that explains why Lehi's family can simply walk up and eat the fruit. There's no rod, there's no path, there's no mist, they just go eat. But these later generations, having been lost for hundreds of years, they need a much more complicated, there's a more complicated story about how to get back. And so I take it, this is Lehi seeing the latter days. This is him seeing a situation in which the Lamanites have to get a rod of iron, a word of God, the Book of Mormon has to come forth. They've got to make their way back to the tree. This great and spacious building is the great and abominable church of Nephi's vision. Gentile problems getting in the way of Lamanite redemption, et cetera, et cetera. So this is how I've interpreted it. I have. There's at least a short version of that in my book, First Nephi, a brief theological introduction.
Okay, for the art, I think I have two things I'd like to say. I would love to see more of a truly abstract approach to Lehi's dream. So we have so much figurative narrative art. I would love to just see something a little more thematic or abstract. And there is some of that. I'd be fun to see more of it. And then secondly, just more of it that centers Christ or the I'm gonna grab the book. Thank you. Sorry, I don't have the slide as handy, but one of the pieces I mentioned in here that does do this is by Kathleen Peterson. And I know you can't really see this, but Christ is there in front of the tree with his arms outstretched, and his body forms the trunk of the tree, and it brings some beautiful parallels with the Christ crucifixion and the tree of life as being one thing. And Kathleen also brings in all these other interesting symbols, the 12 tribes of Israel, and these angels. And I like that her style is kind of folksy and not afraid to just lean into this sort of weirdness of Mormon symbolism and theology. And I guess I'd like to see more of that, like art that really just leans into that and is really uniquely LDS. Okay.
So, I know the President Reeves was charged to be spiritual and intellectual. So what intellectual, working on this project, what intellectual language came out to you, what spiritual language?
That's a great question. So the question is that BYU has this unique mission of being bilingual, and that language goes back to President Kimball way back when, that BYU must be bilingual to speak in the language of the academy and to speak the language of faith. So how did that come out in this project? yeah, I mean, I feel like we're always walking a kind of line when we do these kinds of projects, especially when published by a BYU entity. If we published this with the University of Illinois Press, it would probably have a different tone, right? We flirted with the University of Illinois Press at one point in the project. So, yeah, so we're always walking a kind of line there. The task of theology, for my money, is where that bilingual project comes out in full. When we're doing historical work, if it has a spiritual dimension, it's often just sort of like, we do a bunch of historical work and then we say, and all of that helps us see that the Book of Mormon is true because Joseph Smith couldn't have known that. But that tends to be the only kind of spiritual kick, right? And when we do like really strict devotional work or doctrinal work, it tends to be like spiritual, and the only intellectual work is it had footnotes or something like that, right? But theology is unique. Theology is very rigorous academically. We're in conversation with very serious scholars in the history of thought, but theology is always inside talk. It's always confessional. And so one of the things we deliberately did in the book with all 7 of the essays is ask the authors to get the last 1,000 words of their essay to telling us what that you've done here. What does this show us about the nature of God? So every one of these essays concludes on the note of coming back after all the interpretive work and so on, and saying, now, who is the God of Lehi Street? And so, yeah, I hope we really walk that nicely, being as rigorous, serious as possible, that we could put this in the hands of people outside our tradition, but also the kind of thing that can sit in the pew in sacrament meeting. Yeah. I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, no, that was beautifully said. And I'll just add, in terms of the art, I conclude my essay with the idea that good religious art is art that sends us back to the scriptures. And I think these 9 new pieces do that for me, where they've made me think, well, wait a minute, what is this? What do the scriptures actually say? What is this moment? And they've sent me back to read it again for myself. And I think that ties into this work of theology, because we see the artists having wrestled with the scriptures and seeking revelation in their own process. And as the viewer, then we come and we see what the artist has done, and then we build another layer on top of that with our own engagement with the art and the scripture and seeking revelation. So it's like this layered process of working as a community with the art and the theologians and us and God, you know, trying to understand the nature of God and how we get to the tree.
Well, thank you very much. Wonderful. We really appreciate both of you, all the work you've done on this, and we realize the tightrope that you walk when you work like this, and it makes it even more precious to us. I'd like to invite any of you that would like to just stand here and visit. Gail graciously brought us some cookies and water in the other room, and we don't usually have a closing prayer. It feels weird. Would someone like volunteer to say closing prayer? Guess, all right, thank you. Not there. It's fine.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we humbly tell you ways and are so grateful for the Creepers and to opening their home and their spirit to us and their generosity. We're grateful for the Berkeys and for the time to come, the authors, right to them that they would share. Please bless them for their efforts, enlighten them and enlighten us, and may we always seek to understand thy true nature. And we say this is humbly in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, everyone.